crisis in Zimbabwe continues as the deposed President Robert Mugabe ignores today's deadline for him to resign. More protests on the streets as moves begin to impeach the president who's led the country for nearly 4 decades. We'll have the latest from our correspondents in Zimbabwe, also this lunchtime. The EU's chief Brexit negotiator says an ambitious free trade deal with Britain is on the table, but only if the UK meets its conditions. Angela Merkel holds crisis talks with Germany's president after the collapse of negotiations to form a coalition government. Jana Novotná, the winner of the 1998 Wimbledon women's singles title, has died at the age of 49 from cancer. The scene live at Westminster Abbey, where the bells are ringing to mark a royal platinum wedding anniversary, as the Queen and Prince Philip celebrate 70 years of married life.
And coming up in the sport, West Brom sack manager Tony Pulis with the club just 1 point above the Premier League relegation zone and without a win since August.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. The deadline set by Zimbabwe's ruling party for President Robert Mugabe to resign passed this morning with no response from the head of state. His party, ZANU-PF, has now begun discussing the impeachment of the embattled leader, calling him a source of instability and blaming him for the country's economic problems. In a speech to the nation last night, Mr. Mugabe defied expectations and made it clear he had no intention of stepping down, despite intervention from the military last week. Well, Ben Brown is in the capital, Harare, for us now. Ben.
Yes, Rita, when Robert Mugabe went on television last night with that address, there was a real expectation right across this country that he was going to resign. And when he didn't, there was shock and disbelief and real anger as well. And today, ZANU-PF, his party, the party that's already sacked him as leader, is launching impeachment proceedings against him. Now, to impeach him, they will need a 2/3 majority in both houses of the parliament down there behind me. But one MP has told me that could take weeks or months, and even then it might not be successful. Our Zimbabwe correspondent, Shingai Nyoka, reports.
The next stage of the battle is set. Robert Mugabe is on one side, his party on the other.
I will preside over its processes.
Last night, he didn't step down as expected. Party leaders had given him until today to do so. The midday deadline to resign has come and gone. The ZANU-PF party is now preparing to put the final wheels in motion. It summoned all its lawmakers to the ZANU-PF headquarters behind me to discuss a possible impeachment. The process will then move to Parliament, where the Constitution says a 2/3 majority will be needed to remove Zimbabwe's longtime leader. Lawmakers can cite misconduct, violating the Constitution, or mental or physical incapacity as grounds for dismissal. But it's not clear how long the process will take, and this president doesn't appear to be in the mood to play ball.
It depends on how fast Parliament moves. It could take a few days, it could take a few months. But the beauty is that it is a process that is provided for in the Constitution in Section 97. So I think it is now the only hope for the country that the president is removed in terms of that section of the Constitution.
Unprecedented waves of protest across the country have failed to persuade the only leader this country has known to go. And they continue to spread. Students at the main university are now boycotting their exams.
Until Robert Mugabe resigns, we are not going to write an exam. No one is going to write an exam. This university is going to be declared closed.
Inflation is rising each and every day. So we are sick and tired because of that. We want him to resign.
We want change. The Constitution should change. The Parliament should change. We should reshuffle our country.
And the war veterans say they will escalate their protests this week.
Mugabe, go now, go now. Mugabe, go now, go now. Your time is up. Please leave State House and let the country start on a new page.
It's been a long week of events never witnessed here before, and the desire to at least give the appearance of removing him by the book is slowing the process down. But finding a quick resolution to this impasse may prove very hard to find. Shingai Nyoka, BBC News, Harare.
Now, Rita, over the weekend we saw a massive demonstration against Robert Mugabe here on the streets of Harare. Tens of thousands of people taking to the streets. Another huge demonstration has been called for tomorrow. But Mr. Mugabe has shown that he doesn't care about pressure from his own party, from the army, and he doesn't care about people power either. Rita.
Ben, thank you. The BBC's Ben Brown there. The EU's chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, has warned Britain that it can't cherry-pick parts of the single market that it wants to keep. But he said that Brussels was ready to offer the UK the most ambitious free trade deal if its terms are met. Theresa May is chairing a meeting of senior cabinet ministers to discuss the size of the so-called divorce bill, the money the UK needs to pay to start trade talks. Our political correspondent El Nagania reports from Westminster.
Busy ahead of the budget on Wednesday, highlighting the government's plans for investing in technology and engineering. But the Prime Minister and the Chancellor too know Brexit is the backdrop to everything.
Hello.
And it's the money, the so-called Brexit bill, that's the main sticking point in the negotiations.
We've been very clear that we will honour our commitments. But what I want to see is developing that deep and special partnership with the European Union for the future. And I want to see us moving together because, as I've always said, a deal that's good for the UK will be a deal that's good for the rest of the European Union.
Over in Brussels, the EU's chief negotiator said the preference was for an ambitious trade deal, but only if Brexit divorce issues get sorted.
On settling the accounts accurately, we owe this to taxpayers as well as to all those benefiting from EU funding projects.
But there was also a clear message on sticking to the rules and the free movement of goods, capital, services and people.
Those who claim that the UK should cherry-pick parts of the single market must stop this contradiction.
The two sides have been sitting down to negotiations for months with no major breakthroughs. There's increasing pressure from Brussels for the UK to come up with solutions. And back here, calls on the Chancellor to watch how he spends taxpayers' money.
He cannot afford to play Santa Claus to Juncker and Tusk. He needs to ensure that we're only paying exactly for what are our obligations, for what we are absolutely contracted for. And for every pound that he unnecessarily gives away to the European Union is a pound not being spent on British public services.
When Theresa May and senior ministers meet later on to discuss the size of the Brexit bill, they'll know agreeing to pay more will quicken the talks, but it will also cause anger amongst some. Getting agreement within cabinet is crucial, and as EU leaders keep pointing out, the clock is ticking. Ellen Naganya, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, in a moment, we'll speak to our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, in Westminster. But first to Brussels and to our Europe correspondent, Damien Grammaticus. And Damien, what is the message that the EU negotiator, Michel Barnier, is trying to send?
Well, Rachel, I think it's very interesting. This speech this morning clearly comes within the context of all of those things you're hearing in the debates in the UK. First thing, the highlight at the top, Michel Barnier saying the EU wants the most ambitious free trade agreement with the UK. But to achieve that, his speech went on to lay out conditions. And of course, we all know about the exit agreement dealing with things like the money. Now, he moved on very quickly from that, which is interesting because I think the speech was all about Michel Barnier pointing the UK towards difficult choices that the EU believes the UK has to make to move things forward. So Ireland, he pointed to that. He said Northern Ireland, the UK has said that it would apply some EU rules in Ireland. What's unclear is what rules. What is the UK willing to commit to avoid a hard border, he said. They want the UK to focus on the question of Ireland. And moving forward again, that issue about participation or access to the single market, he said that would all depend on how much the UK sought to diverge in the future, because he said the legal consequence of Brexit is that the UK is quitting the single market and UK banks will lose their access. He said the further the UK diverges, the harder it will be to get a deal that gives the UK good access back into the single market in future. That's a question they want the UK to focus on.
And Norman, all this as Theresa May appears poised to pay a bigger divorce bill. How likely do you think that that's going to happen?
I think all the signs are, Rita, that Mrs May and her senior ministers will agree to a bigger bill, certainly than the £18 billion floated by Mrs May in Florence, and that's because they know they've got to put more cash on the table if the EU is going to move on to those crucial trade talks. Now, the extra cash will come with strings, so there's likely to be an insistence that this money is only for past bills signed up for, not for ongoing EU commitments. Also, they will want an assurance that the EU is going to move on to trade talks. In other words, they're not going to take the cash, put it in their back pocket and say, well, how about some more money? However, this is fraught politics because the risk, of course, is of a significant backlash from a public who were told during the referendum campaign that we were going to get £350 million a week for the NHS. Instead, we're having to hand over billions as part of a divorce bill. And already we've heard from Tory MPs saying we've got to have an itemised list of why we're having to spend all this money. And this, of course, in the week of the budget, when the Chancellor is under massive pressure to ease off on austerity. So I doubt we will get a fixed figure of how much we're prepared to pay today or maybe any time soon. More likely, though, a nod and a wink to Brussels that down the line, yes, we are ready to pay more, and maybe a lot more.
Norman, thank you. Norman Smith there in Westminster and Damien Grammaticus in Brussels. Meanwhile, the European Union will decide this evening where two major EU agencies currently based in London will be relocated after Brexit. 19 cities are bidding for the European Medicines Agency, while 8 want to host the European Banking Authority. More than 1,000 people work for the two agencies. Our business correspondent Theo Leggett has the details.
London's Canary Wharf is home to some of the world's biggest banks and two prestigious EU agencies. The European Banking Authority, which monitors the health of the region's biggest banks, and the European Medicines Agency, which supervises drugs used on both humans and animals. But now we're leaving the EU, both of those organisations will have to move, and today they'll find out where they're going. 24 cities are scrambling to host them. The European Commission says the two agencies employ about 1,100 people. Many of them are very well paid. But they also attract many business visitors for meetings, conferences and expert panels, who between them book about 40,000 hotel rooms a year.
The UK will lose 1,100 good jobs of regulators who spend money in the capital, but there's much more to it than that. Having a regulator creates a sort of halo effect because lots of American and Japanese businesses set up shop in London precisely because they want their staff to be close to the regulator so they can help shape its decisions, get their products under their noses.
It's a similar story in the banking sector. The European Banking Authority may be a relatively small agency, but it wields a lot of influence.
It tells us a lot about where the Europeans want their financial centre to be. Will it be Dublin, Paris or Frankfurt? And secondly, there's a whole ecosystem that's built up around the Banking Authority here in London. Will that move as well? Quite possibly there are more jobs than just that 160 that will move, with retail banks moving to follow the regulator.
The result's been a kind of beauty parade, with cities across Europe setting out their stalls. They've been told they have to provide offices and IT systems, good transport links, and hundreds of school places.
Bucharest is a vivid European city for a smart agency.
And they've been offering extra perks, such as subsidised rents, language lessons, and free visits to the zoo. Even heads of government have been helping with the hard sell.
Dublin is an open, multicultural and cosmopolitan city.
Other EU members may not necessarily be keen on Britain's departure, but they're happy to pick up benefits where they can. Theo Leggett, BBC News.
The German Chancellor Angela Merkel's attempts to form a coalition government have collapsed, raising the prospect of the country facing another general election. After weeks of negotiations, the centrist Free Democrats, the FDP, pulled out of talks, with its leader saying there was no basis of trust between the parties. Mrs Merkel has been meeting the German president this morning. Well, our correspondent Damien McGuinness is in Berlin for us now. And Damien, what does this now mean for Angela Merkel and for Germany?
Well, it's certainly a blow for Angela Merkel. That's because she was responsible, really, as the potential chancellor of making these coalition talks work. So some people say it would be hard for her to survive politically, which means this would be the end of the Merkel era, rather unexpectedly sooner than originally thought. But it really depends how the public reacts to this breakdown in the coalition talks, because the recriminations are already starting. And this morning, most German commentators seem to be blaming the liberal FDP party, as you say, they're the ones who walked out of these talks, for the breakdown. And so what we might see, if there's a backlash against other political parties, Angela Merkel could in fact be strengthened, because quite often when things are getting rocky, either abroad or domestically, she's often seen as a sort of anchor of stability. So she could even emerge stronger from this. But what is clear is that we're going to see a period of political instability here in Germany, because none of the options going forward for the new government are good. We either have a minority government, fresh elections, and they would mean that we'd have months before the next elections are taken place, and this would lead to effectively political limbo, which could have a big impact on the German economy.
Damien, thank you. The former Wimbledon singles champion Jana Novotná has died of cancer at the age of 49. The Czech tennis player won the championship in 1998 after losing 5 years earlier to Steffi Graf in a memorable match. Ms. Novotná, who also had an outstanding doubles career, has been described by the Women's Tennis Association as an inspiration. Our sports correspondent David Ornstein looks back at her life.
It remains one of Wimbledon's most enduring images. Jana Novotná may have lost the 1993 final to Steffi Graf, but she won a shoulder to cry on from the Duchess of Kent and the hearts of the British public.
Overcome with the emotion of it all.
She just told me, Jana, you will do it. I believe you, one day you will do it. And I just became very emotional, and it was very nice. I appreciate it very much, what she said.
Novotná finished runner-up again in 1997, though a year later she finally secured the trophy with victory over Natalie Tozia.
She's done it.
News of her death has been met with a mixture of shock and an outpouring of tributes.
I can only describe her as someone who was a ruthless competitor on the court, but she was utterly sweet and charming off it. She was such a warm person. She was always very, very friendly off the court, always the first person to come up and smile and give you a couple of kisses, and, really, really loved by everyone.
The Czech right-hander rose to prominence in the early 90s and went on to become one of the most exciting, popular and successful players of her generation. Wimbledon was Novotná's only Grand Slam singles title. However, she collected 16 in doubles and a total of 100 tournament wins across a glittering career, playing her way into the International Tennis Hall of Fame. She was back on the lawns of SW19 as recently as 2016, rolling back the years in the invitational mixed doubles. But Novotná will always be remembered for the tears and then the triumph, refusing to let the setbacks keep her down, eventually coming out on top and writing her name into history with a smile.
Jana Novotná, who's died at the age of 49. The time is 18 minutes past 1. Our top story this lunchtime. The crisis in Zimbabwe continues as its deposed president, Robert Mugabe, ignores today's deadline for him to resign. And coming up, a change in culture. The new head of UK sport calls for more to be done to improve the welfare of top-level athletes.
Coming up in sport, England's cricketers relax in Brisbane ahead of the first Ashes test on Thursday, and pace bowler Jake Ball confirms he has recovered from his ankle injury and is fully fit.
The notorious cult leader Charles Manson, who directed his followers to commit a string of brutal murders, has died, aged 83. He'd been in prison in California for more than 4 decades. In 1969, his followers, known as the Manson family, killed 7 people. Among them was the heavily pregnant Hollywood actress Sharon Tate, the wife of Roman Polanski. James Cook reports from Los Angeles.
Charles Manson. The name itself is synonymous with evil, a killer who did no killing, but whose crimes shocked the world. In August 1969, followers of his cult broke into the Hollywood home of Sharon Tate. The pregnant actress, who was married to the director Roman Polanski, was brutally murdered, along with 4 of her friends. The next night, the so-called Manson family killed again, tying up and murdering a wealthy couple. This was the ramshackle ranch in Death Valley, where Manson lived in a commune with his young runaway fans. They apparently used LSD and saw the guitar-playing ex-convict as a kind of saint, or perhaps a devil. Charles Manson was charged not with wielding a knife or firing a gun, but with controlling and directing the killers.
I don't accept the court. I don't accept the whole situation. You know, like I was in the desert minding my business. This confusion belongs to you. It's your confusion. I don't have any confusion. I don't have any guilt. I know what I've done, and no man can judge me. I judge me. What have you done, Charlie?
And why had he done it? Apparently to spark a race war. It would be called helter-skelter, and he would use it to seize power. In 1971, Manson was sentenced to death on 7 counts of murder, later commuted to life in prison. Over the years, Charles Manson applied for parole time and time again, but he died a prisoner, having shattered the peace and love of the 1960s with diabolical violence.
And that was James Cook reporting on the death of Charles Manson. The owner of British Gas, Centrica, has announced it'll scrap standard gas and electricity tariffs for new customers. It claims this is part of a series of measures which will be significantly more effective than the government's proposed cap on energy bills. Well, our business correspondent Simon Gompertz is here with me now. So, Simon, what difference is this likely to make to customers?
Well, 2/3 of gas and electricity customers are on what we call standard variable tariffs, 5 million British gas customers. And these are the tariffs that the Prime Minister last month condemned as rip-off prices and promised that there would be a price cap coming in. And what British Gas, Centrica, is saying is that there's a better way, that they will start phasing it out from next spring. So if people come to the end of a short-term fixed-rate discounted deal, they won't be automatically put on the standard variable rate, the expensive one, as they have been up until now. They'll go on to another short-term, hopefully cheaper deal. Now, they say there isn't a catch here. Some people might be suspicious that it's all becoming a bit more complicated. It'll be difficult to negotiate this particular course of which is the right or wrong deal, so they will have to be more wary. The other thing that British Gas has said today is that £200 should be taken off the average bill. That's nearly 20%. How do they get to that number? It's adding together the cost of subsidising renewable energy they have to do, putting in high-tech smart meters, subsidising the bills of people on low incomes. British Gas, Centrica, is saying that should come out of taxation because it's government policy, not out of energy bills, and the Chancellor should pick it up. Unlikely given the Chancellor's constraints at the moment, but it's the companies trying to put out there. It's not them that are responsible for all of the expensive bills.
Simon, thank you. A BBC investigation has uncovered claims of child abuse within the Jehovah's Witness organisation, and there are fears the church's own rules could be protecting alleged perpetrators. Some experts believe the problem could be widespread, and the Charity Commission has now launched an inquiry. Felicity Kevasick reports.
Louise Palmer from Hell's Owen was just 4 years old when her brother started sexually assaulting and raping her. She's waived her right to anonymity to tell her story.
It just felt normal. Growing up, I thought that's what happened. That's what you did with your brother. That's what happened.
They'd been born into the Jehovah's Witness faith, an organisation that preaches kindness and unity. She feels let down by them after they told her not to go to the police when she revealed the years of abuse.
I asked them, what should I do? Do you report it to the police? Do I report it to the police? And their words were that they strongly advised me not to go to the police because it would bring reproach on Jehovah.
Louise's brother Richard Davenport was found guilty in 2015 and is serving a 10-year sentence for rape and abuse. She wants the Jehovah's Witnesses to rethink their protection policies.
I believe that children aren't safe. The safeguarding policies need to be updated. No child is ever going to feel like they can come forward, and they're not going to be supported if they come forward either.
In 2013, the Charity Commission started a statutory inquiry into the organisation known as the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society after safeguarding issues. The inquiry is still ongoing, and an MP says he wants reassurances that safeguarding is top of the agenda.
People must be free to practice their religion, and we don't want to intrude upon that. But if it is established on the basis of a rigorous inquiry that something is going badly wrong, well, that is going to have to be ripped out root and branch.
I tried to speak to some elders at several Kingdom halls across the West Midlands. Now, their phones either rang out or they referred me to the Watchtower in London, which is their headquarters. The Watchtower refused to put anybody up for interview. Instead, they've given me a statement. Jehovah's Witnesses abhor child abuse and do not shield abusers from the authorities or from the consequences of their actions. For Louise, a survivor of years of abuse, the message is simple. Don't stay silent. Tell the police. Felicity Kovacic, BBC News.
3 people arrested in connection with the disappearance of Gaia Pope have been released from the police investigation without any further action. The 19-year-old's body was found on Saturday in a field near Swanage, 11 days after she was last seen. Dorset police are treating her death as unexplained, but are waiting for toxicology results. The new chair of UK Sport, Dame Catherine Granger, has called for a lot more to be done to improve the welfare of athletes. Several governing bodies are embroiled in bullying allegations, and Dame Catherine, an Olympic rowing gold medalist, says they must rise to the challenge of improving the culture in top-level sport. UK Sport is issuing new guidance to coaches on how to treat athletes with respect, as Richard Conway reports.
It has been an era of unprecedented success for British sport, but with complaints and now inquiries underway within a number of the UK's leading sports federations, many are asking if winning has been prioritised over athlete welfare. In response, Olympic gold medalist rower Dame Catherine Granger, who now chairs UK Sport, the funding authority for elite athletes, is urging British sports to improve.
There's nobody in the system who believes that it should be medals at any cost. You know, there really is an understanding that the healthiest atmosphere you can have, as I said, it'll still always be tough, but it needs to keep athletes in the system. You want them succeeding, you want them being pushed hard, but also, you know, ultimately you have to enjoy it, you have to be passionate about it.
British Gymnastics is the latest governing body to be dragged into the welfare crisis after inquiries into duty of care standards at British cycling, British swimming, British canoeing, GB Taekwondo and the British Bobsleigh and Skeleton Association. Change can't come soon enough for those who say they've experienced a culture of bullying.
Daniel Keating's swinging straight, swinging clean.
For us, there was no one to talk to. And you fear that if you do speak up, then you're going to be kicked off the team. There needs to be something or someone that we can speak to where there will be no repercussions, who will have the athletes back.
UK Sport has now released new guidance to help sports such as Britain's hugely successful cycling team. It includes advice to coaches on how to treat athletes with more respect. The hope now is that medal performances and a greater focus on welfare can forge a new winning combination. Richard Conway, BBC News.
The Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh today celebrating their 70th wedding anniversary, the longest in the royal family's history. They're marking the occasion privately with family and friends at Windsor Castle. The church bells are ringing out this lunchtime at Westminster Abbey, where the Queen and Prince Philip were married. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell reports.
For any girl, wedding day is the day of her life. As the 21-year-old princess arrived at Westminster Abbey, it was her moment too.
A November day, 2 years after the end of the Second World War. At Westminster Abbey, a wedding of the then Princess Elizabeth and Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten.
And now the solemn service begins.
I, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary,
Take thee, Philip,
take thee, Philip,
to my wedded husband.
to my wedded husband.
It was the start of a marriage which has endured for 70 years and which, from the moment Elizabeth came to the throne in 1952, has underpinned the success and stability of her reign as Queen. Those who know them have no doubt that the bride and groom who signed the marriage register that day at the Abbey were deeply committed to each other.
Obviously, they were very much in love. I mean, it was, you know, it's early love, as far as I can understand it. So it's a love match, essentially. It's a great love story. A sort of deeply loyal sense of duty, which is bolstered and encouraged and uplifted, as it were, by their faith.
The early years of the Queen's reign were not without difficulty for the Duke. He felt he had no clear purpose, but he adapted to the role of consort to the monarch, and for decade after decade they toured the world and fulfilled official duties together. A couple, so much of whose lives have been public, sustained by the private bond between them, which remains strong and deep, as the latest photographs issued to mark their platinum wedding anniversary make clear. At Westminster Abbey, bells are being rung to mark the anniversary. As for the couple themselves, they're spending the day quietly at Windsor, where there'll be a private family party in their honour tonight. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Time for a look at the weather now. Here's Ben Rich. Ben.
Hi there, Rita. I'm sure you'll have noticed the change in the feel of the weather today. Rewinds to yesterday morning, Sunday morning, and many of us started the day like this, with a touch of frost and temperatures down below freezing. Now, this morning, completely different. If you dressed for cold weather, you probably regretted it, because some of us were in single digits by the rush hour. But with that, a lot of cloud and some outbreaks of rain. Here's the satellite picture. This conveyor belt of clouds streaming in from the Atlantic, which will continue to bring some outbreaks of rain at times through this week. But certainly through the next few days, it's all about this mild air wafting up from the southwest. Notice, though, something a little bit colder still holding on across the far north. So, for this afternoon, most of us cloudy with some patchy rain, the rain turning increasingly light. Some brightness perhaps for Wales and the Midlands, but most places won't see any of that. Mild for many, but still a little bit colder across Scotland. In fact, just 3 degrees as the afternoon high in Shetland. And as we go through this evening and tonight, it'll stay mostly cloudy, quite misty and murky in places, patchy rain, and then some heavy rain for Northern Ireland, Northern England, Southern Scotland, and also Northern Scotland later in the night. A touch of frost there in the Northern Isles, but everywhere else mild. In fact, very mild across southern areas of England and Wales. Tomorrow morning, then, a cold start for Shetland. Elsewhere across Scotland, a wet start. Some heavy bursts of rain here. Quite breezy as well. Northern Ireland largely dry at this stage, 8 o'clock in the morning, but pretty cloudy. Cloudy and damp and murky as well for parts of northern England. And a lot of cloud further south as well across the Midlands, Wales, southern England. But look at these temperatures, 11, 12 degrees as we start off the day. Now, as we go on through the day, we keep the feed of mild southwesterly winds. The rain across Scotland only very slowly trudging its way northwards, and then we'll see another batch of rain pushing in from the west later in the day. But for central and eastern areas of England, here should stay dry for much of the day, and there is just a chance of seeing some glimmers of brightness through the cloud. Mild in the south, still that bit colder further north. Now, through Tuesday night into Wednesday, we try to lose this area of low pressure, but there's another one hot on its heels, and this wriggling weather front threatens to bring some really heavy rain in places on Wednesday, particularly Wales and northwest England. That could cause 1 or 2 issues. To the southeast, very mild, quite windy, 15 degrees. Further north and west, single-digit temperatures across Scotland. And actually, as we head towards the end of the week, it looks like the cold air will stage something of a comeback. A bit of uncertainty about how far south it will get. There'll be some showers at times, but particularly across the northern half of the country, it is going to turn colder again by the end of the week. Rita.
Thank you, Ben. A reminder now of our main story this lunchtime. The crisis in Zimbabwe continues as its deposed President Robert Mugabe ignores today's deadline for him to resign. Well, that is all from BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from me. And on BBC One, we can now join the BBC's news teams where you are. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.